Imagine you're a defense analyst sitting in a Pentagon briefing room, and someone slides a report across the table that reads, Iran just built a missile that turns one launch into multiple simultaneous strikes. And it only costs $1 million. You'd probably think that's impossible. You'd think no country with Iran's budget, Iran's sanctions, Iran's isolation from Western technology could pull that off. But here's the thing, they did. And the United States military, along with every allied defense establishment from Tel Aviv to Riyadh, is now staring at that exact problem. This isn't science fiction. This isn't propaganda out of Tehran. This is a real weapon, a real capability shift, and it represents one of the most disruptive developments in Middle Eastern military power in the last 2 decades. The weapon is called the Fatah-2, and what makes it terrifying is not just the technology, it's what that technology means for every missile defense system America and its allies have spent billions of dollars building. Because here's what nobody's talking about loudly enough. A $1 million missile that splits into multiple warheads does not just threaten a target. It threatens the entire economic logic of modern air defense. And when the math stops working in your favor, wars change, deterrence changes, the entire regional balance of power changes. So, before you scroll past this, before you write this off as just another weapons story, stay with me. This one actually matters. Hit that like button right now because what you're about to hear will genuinely change how you see the Middle East. Let's start with context, because without it, none of this lands the way it should. For the better part of 30 years, the United States has operated under a very specific military assumption in the Middle East, that American air superiority and missile defense technology would always outclass anything a regional adversary could throw at it. Iron Dome, Patriot batteries, THAAD systems, Aegis destroyers, these weren't just weapons. They were a statement. They were America and its allies saying, go ahead, launch whatever you want. We'll knock it down before it ever reaches us. And for a long time, that statement held up. Scuds got shot down over Saudi Arabia during the Gulf War. Hezbollah rockets got intercepted over Israeli cities. The shield worked, more or less, often enough to matter. But Iran has spent the last 15 years studying that shield very carefully. And what they figured out, what their engineers and scientists quietly worked toward through sanctions, through isolation, through stolen intelligence and reverse-engineered components, is that the shield has a fundamental weakness, not a technical weakness, an economic one. Here's the basic math that drives modern missile defense. When an enemy fires a ballistic missile at you, you fire an interceptor back at it. The problem is, the interceptor costs dramatically more than the incoming missile. An Iranian Shahab ballistic missile might cost a few $100,000 to produce. A Patriot PAC-3 interceptor, the thing you shoot to knock it down, costs somewhere between $3 and $4 million per shot. And that's a terrible trade for the defender. You're spending $3 or $4 to stop every $1 the attacker spends. Do that enough times, and you go broke before they do. Defense economists call this the cost exchange ratio, and when it tilts too far in the attacker's favor, the entire strategic calculus of a conflict shifts dramatically. Iran understood this problem before they built the solution to it, and the solution is exactly what makes the Fatah-2 so significant. The Fatah-2 is Iran's most advanced hypersonic ballistic missile. It was unveiled publicly in late 2023, and when Iranian state media showed it off, most Western analysts acknowledged it as a real step forward. But many underestimated what the follow-on development would produce. The version we're talking about now incorporates what defense analysts call a MIRV capability. MIRV stands for Multiple Independently Targetable Reentry Vehicles. If that sounds familiar, it's because MIRVs were a Cold War nuclear technology. The United States and Soviet Union developed them for their intercontinental ballistic missiles, the idea being that one missile could carry multiple nuclear warheads and deliver them to separate targets simultaneously, overwhelming any defense system trying to intercept them. Iran has adapted that concept, stripped it of the nuclear warhead requirement, and applied it to a conventional precision-guided ballistic missile. What that means in plain English is this. You fire one Fatah-2, and at a certain point in its flight trajectory, it releases multiple warheads, potentially maneuvering warheads, that separate and head toward either the same target from multiple angles simultaneously, or toward multiple different targets altogether. And the entire thing, from launch to impact, happens so fast and in such a way that existing missile defense systems struggle enormously to track, prioritize, and intercept all of the incoming objects at once. Now, let's talk about why the price matters so much. Iran claims the Fatah-2 costs approximately $1 million per unit. Independent defense analysts think the real cost is somewhat higher, but still dramatically lower than Western equivalents. Even if we put it at $2 or $3 million, consider what a defender now has to spend to stop it. If one Fatah-2 releases 3 or 4 independent warheads, a defending Patriot battery would need to fire multiple interceptors, each costing $3 to $4 million, at each of those warheads, simultaneously because you cannot afford to miss. A single THAAD interceptor runs somewhere around $10 million per shot. If you're firing THAAD rounds at multiple maneuvering warheads released from a single Iranian missile, you might spend $20, $30, $40 million to stop what cost Iran $1 or $2 million to launch. That is not a sustainable defense posture. Not for one battle. Not for a sustained campaign. And Iran knows it. Let's be clear about something important here. This isn't Iran trying to match American military power head to head. That was never the strategy. Iran's military doctrine has always been asymmetric. Find the gaps, exploit the weaknesses, drive up the cost of opposition until the political will to sustain that opposition collapses. They did it with proxy warfare in Iraq, bleeding American forces through IEDs and insurgency for years. They did it with Hezbollah in Lebanon, using cheap rockets to overwhelm Israeli defenses and exhaust their interceptor stockpiles. They did it with drone swarms and cruise missiles in 2019, when the attack on Saudi Aramco's Abqaiq facility temporarily knocked out 5% of global oil supply using weapons that cost a tiny fraction of what the defense systems protecting that facility cost. The Fatah-2 is the next evolution of that exact same strategy, but applied to the most sophisticated threat scenario possible. This is Iran saying, "We have studied your defenses for 30 years, we understand your economic vulnerabilities, and we have now built a weapon specifically engineered to exploit them at scale." Now, here's where this gets really important for an American audience, because this isn't just an abstract Middle Eastern arms race story. This has direct implications for American military commitments in the region, for American defense spending, and for the security of American allies who depend on the United States military guarantee. The most immediate concern is Israel. The Israeli Defense Forces operate some of the most sophisticated layered air defense systems on the planet. Iron Dome for short-range rockets, David's Sling for medium-range threats, Arrow 2 and Arrow 3 for ballistic missiles. In April 2024, when Iran launched a direct attack on Israeli territory for the first time in history, firing over 300 drones, cruise missiles, and ballistic missiles, Israel, with American and Allied support, successfully intercepted the overwhelming majority of them. It was an impressive display of integrated air defense, but it was also extraordinarily expensive, and military analysts noted that Israel burned through a significant number of high-cost interceptors in a single night. If that same attack had been conducted with Fatah-2 missiles releasing multiple maneuvering warheads, the interception math gets dramatically harder. Arrow 3 interceptors, which handle exo-atmospheric ballistic threats, cost roughly $2 to $3 million each. Against a MIRV-capable missile, and stockpile replenishment isn't instant. American weapons manufacturing capacity, as the Ukraine conflict has made painfully clear, is not able to produce interceptors on demand at the rate a sustained modern conflict would consume them. There are waiting lists. There are production bottlenecks. There are supply chain constraints. The strategic logic of a weapon like the Fatah-2 isn't necessarily to punch through air defenses in a single dramatic strike. It's to exhaust those defenses over time, forcing the defender to make impossible choices about which threats to intercept and which to let through. Beyond Israel, the Gulf states are watching this very closely. Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates have invested enormous sums in Patriot systems and THAAD batteries, precisely because of the Iranian missile threat. The 2019 Aramco attack was a wake-up call, but both countries have continued to modernize their air defenses in the years since. The Fatah-2 complicates their picture significantly. If Iran can credibly threaten to overwhelm those defenses at an economically favorable exchange rate, the deterrent value of those American-supplied systems diminishes. And when deterrence weakens, the probability of miscalculation, the probability of someone deciding that military action is viable because the costs are manageable, goes up. There's also a broader proliferation concern here that doesn't get enough attention. Iran is not operating in isolation. It has established military technology transfer relationships with Russia, which has used Iranian Shahed drones extensively in Ukraine. It has relationships with Hezbollah in Lebanon and with Houthi forces in Yemen, both of whom have already demonstrated the willingness and capability to launch sustained missile and drone campaigns against neighboring countries and shipping lanes. If MIRV-capable short and medium-range ballistic missiles, even simplified versions, begin to proliferate through those networks, the problem that today sits primarily in the Iran-Israel Gulf state triangle expands to encompass much of the broader region. Let's talk about what the United States is actually doing in response. Because the American defense establishment is not sitting still on this. The Pentagon has been accelerating development of directed energy weapons, high-powered lasers and microwave systems, precisely because the cost economics of lasers are fundamentally different from the cost economics of kinetic interceptors. A laser shot costs roughly a few dollars in electricity. If you can reliably knock down an incoming warhead with a laser, the exchange ratio problem flips. The attacker is spending hundreds of thousands of dollars. The defender is spending almost nothing per shot. The challenge is that directed energy systems capable of engaging ballistic threats at scale are still primarily developmental. They're not deployed in significant numbers in the field, and they face real operational constraints around range, atmospheric conditions, and engagement timelines. The Navy is also investing heavily in railgun technology and advanced versions of the SM-6 interceptor, which has a lower cost profile than THAAD while still offering a genuine ballistic missile defense capability. And American cyber and electronic warfare programs are specifically designed to target adversary command and control systems. The idea being that if you can disrupt the launch rather than intercept the missile after launch, you solve the cost problem entirely. But here's the honest reality. None of those solutions are fully mature. None of them are deployed at the scale needed to comprehensively address a sustained Fata-2 salvo campaign right now today. And Iran's weapons program operates on a faster development cycle than most Western analysts gave it credit for even 5 years ago. Part of that is because Iran is no longer developing purely domestically. It has received significant technical assistance from North Korea on ballistic missile technology. It has benefited from Russian expertise in missile guidance systems, expertise transferred as part of the deepened military relationship that the Ukraine war accelerated. And Iranian engineers who study abroad, and many do, particularly in Russia and China, bring knowledge home that gets applied to domestic programs. The $1 million price point also matters in a different way that is worth sitting with for a moment. $1 million, in the context of national defense spending, is essentially nothing. Iran's annual defense budget runs somewhere around $10 to $15 billion depending on the year and the source. If the Fata-2 costs even $2 million fully loaded, Iran can theoretically produce hundreds of them annually without straining its overall defense budget. Now, that's a stockpile. That's a credible, sustained threat capability, not a one-time stunt for a parade. Compare that to the United States defense budget, which runs at nearly $1 trillion annually, and you might think the disparity makes the Iranian capability irrelevant. But the American military is a global force with commitments on 6 continents. It doesn't have the luxury of positioning its entire defensive infrastructure in the Middle East. And American political will to sustain expensive military engagement in the region has been in obvious decline since the Iraq and Afghanistan withdrawals. The strategic calculation Iran is making isn't just about winning a military exchange, it's about making American commitment to the region prohibitively expensive in both dollars and political capital. That's the deeper game being played here. And it's been Iran's game for a long time. The Fata-2 is simply the most technically sophisticated expression of a doctrine that has been remarkably consistent and remarkably patient. What does all of this mean for the average American watching from home? It means the next decade of Middle Eastern security is going to be significantly more complicated and significantly more expensive than the last one. It means the allies, the United States, has treaty obligations to protect, are facing a threat environment that cannot simply be solved by spending more on the current generation of defense technology. It means that American defense contractors, American defense planners, and American elected officials are going to have to make some genuinely difficult decisions about where to invest, what to develop, and how to credibly maintain deterrence against an adversary that has specifically engineered its weapons to be economically unsustainable to defend against. It also means the next regional conflict, if it comes, will look different from what came before. The air defense intercept numbers will be harder, the cost per engagement will be higher, the timeline for stockpile exhaustion will be shorter, and the pressure on political leaders to negotiate, to de-escalate, or conversely to escalate preemptively before those stockpiles run dry will be more intense. Iran didn't just build a missile, they built a problem. A $1 million problem that could cost the United States and its allies tens of billions of dollars to adequately solve, and even then, the solution isn't guaranteed. That's why this matters. That's why defense analysts from Washington to Jerusalem are taking it seriously. And that's why you should be paying attention to what happens in the Middle East in the months and years ahead, not as a distant regional conflict, but as a direct test of whether the military guarantees America has made around the world still hold up when the cost of honoring them keeps climbing. The Fata-2 is a $1 million question, and right now, nobody has a clean answer.